What is the biggest health story of our time? Is it the impact of climate change?
If temperatures continue to climb, the impact on human health could be profound.
The spread of disease?
Outbreaks of the deadly Ebola virus, a global health emergency.
What about the 11 million deaths that are linked to poor diets every year? What we, in many cases, choose to eat. And it's not just about what we eat, it's how it's processed. We've been processing food for a long time. If it's cooked, it's processed. If it's pickled or preserved, it's processed. But when you start seeing things like modified starches, emulsifiers, additives, E-numbers on the back of food packaging, ingredients you wouldn't usually find in a regular kitchen, know that what you are eating is ultra-processed. These industrially formulated products are engineered to enhance shelf life and, crucially, palatability. They've been around for decades, but the term ultra-processed food, or UPF, was only coined in 2009, and that mattered. Because once there was a name,
the health impacts of ultra-processed foods,
journalists could start asking questions about what many experts say is a key driver in a global health crisis.
So what is the actual effect on our health when we take on these ultra-processed foods?
Once it was defined, people could do research on it. And they could look at how much ultra-processed foods they're eating. And as those studies started to come out, they showed a profound influence of ultra-processed foods on poor health. And the media has picked it up.
Now, these things tend to be cyclical. There was a scare about sugar 10, 15 years ago. People were very concerned about fat prior to that. Carbohydrates have been a dietary villain in recent times. These things tend to sell newspapers, they tend to sell books.
Today, around 60% of calories consumed in American households come from UPF, which is linked to higher risks of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, obesity, mental health issues, and premature death. But you wouldn't guess that walking down the aisle of a supermarket. In fact, quite the opposite. Consumers are bombarded with marketing telling them that UPF is not only safe, but healthy. Claims like immune boosting, low fat, packed with goodness, part of a balanced breakfast, what marketers call a health halo. In the US, this approach took off in the 1990s when Congress, after intense lobbying by the food industry, passed legislation allowing manufacturers to make a growing range of what many see as dubious health claims about their products.
So after the early 1990s, they could claim that their products prevented heart disease, prevented cancer. And there was legislation after legislation after legislation that weakened the ability of the Food and Drug Administration to control those advertisements.
In case you haven't already heard the news, Honey Nut Cheerios can help lower your cholesterol as part of a heart-healthy diet.
And allowed food companies much more leeway in marketing their foods as healthy.
I wouldn't say it's misleading or deceptive as such. I mean, companies are going to portray their products in the best possible light. And also, when it comes to food, because of all these various food scares or fads, people are looking for certain types of food. They're looking for particular nutrients, or they're looking for the absence of particular nutrients. So if people are concerned about fat, for example, then I think it's perfectly reasonable if you make a yogurt that's low in fat to say this is low in fat.
One of the biggest factor which I consider misleading is that all these claims, high protein, low sugar, low fat, they attract public attention towards health. But the products contain high amounts of sugar, salt or fats, which is not revealed. So they are actually concealed.
Arun Gupta is one of 43 global experts who contributed to a landmark series in The Lancet, a leading medical journal, that looked at the impact UPF is having on global health. India is significant because it is the fastest growing market of UPF on earth. And according to Gupta, the pattern of poor health has followed the increased consumption. So has the practice of misleading health halos.
One of the commonest factors is, again, I want to repeat, is the concealment of important information. For example, in this ad of noodles, usually a young school-going child, consumption of it is linked to examination results, but nowhere it tells you that it could be high in salt or high in fat or sugar. Where another movie actor, Amir Khan, calling the Britannia biscuits a good choice because they are zero added sugar, but they don't tell what exactly it is in it. For example, you see, so use of fresh tomatoes here, use of coconut here. While their quantity inside the products we found is minuscule. So creating a health halo in these advertisements. So these are important things to remember, that for the purpose of increasing their sales, industry will do anything.
It's not just health halo marketing that lures consumers into a false sense of food security. How often have you gone online and seen a new study touting the latest benefit of a UPF product? Typically, there's nothing organic about that coverage. The studies are usually funded by the industry and tend to produce favorable results. A practice that was exposed by the Associated Press in 2016 that wrote, one of the industry's most powerful tactics is the funding of nutrition research. It carries the weight of academic authority, becomes part of scientific literature, and generates headlines. Conflicts of interest are disclosed these days, but they do raise the question around what kind of research is fit to print.
If you're funded by the food industry and you're doing research into food, and particularly food that company is making, then clearly it's a conflict of interest. People should know about it. But that doesn't mean that the science is corrupt per se. If you believe that, you've got to then prove it. You don't start from the basis that all industry-funded scientists are corrupt and you can ignore everything they ever say. That's why we have a peer review process. That's why we have checks and balances in the world of academia to make sure that the science is as robust as possible.
When I, as a peer reviewer, see a study that is paid for by a company whose product is being tested and the product is shown to be enormously beneficial for health, I turn the study down. I say, don't accept this. This is a conflict of interest here that's so blatant that you really shouldn't be publishing it. This has nothing whatsoever to do with science. It has everything to do with marketing.
A wonderful world of freshness. It's the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful world of Salem cigarettes.
Misleading claims, funded research, lobbying. It's hard not to draw parallels in this story to how Big Tobacco tried to downplay the harmful effects of smoking as far back as the 1950s. It's difficult to quantify how many lives were lost due to that deception, but analysts agree that it's in the millions, and in the US alone, hundreds of billions of dollars have been paid out in lawsuits by Big Tobacco. And given that UPF can also be addictive, it's a comparison that you will often see when this story gets covered.
Big Food's Big Tobacco moment.
Some go further, like in this interview on CBS News with David Kessler, who, as commissioner of the FDA in the 1990s, took on Big Tobacco.
He's now aiming to do the same with the food industry. In terms of a public health crisis, how does this compare with tobacco?
It's as large, if not larger.
The tobacco industry knew long before the general public did that smoking cigarettes cause lung cancer. But the first thing they did was to cast doubt on the research. They funded research to show that cigarettes were harmless. There are some people who smoke and don't get sick. You cast doubt on the research. That's number one. And then after that, you blame personal responsibility. We're not forcing people to smoke cigarettes. And behind the scenes, they did a lot of lobbying to make sure that nobody did any regulation of cigarettes until the evidence was so overwhelming that it couldn't be ignored anymore. And then cigarette companies bought food companies. And they taught the food companies how to do exactly the same thing.
Christopher Snowdon works for the Institute of Economic Affairs and recently produced a paper called The Corporate Playbook. In it, Snowdon argues that these comparisons are misleading. What you'll often hear is pundits going on air and saying big food is taking a leaf out of big tobacco's playbook, but that's a characterization you don't agree with. Why not?
Well, the people who talk about the so-called tobacco playbook, generally speaking, are people who are trying to apply anti-tobacco policies to the food industry or the alcohol industry or the gambling industry or whatever it may be. It's projection, actually. What these people are following is an anti-tobacco playbook of advertising bans, tax rises, demonising the industry, demonising the product, and all the rest of it. They are clearly following this anti-smoking blueprint, and they're accusing what they see as their opponents of doing the same thing.
There's one move that big food can make that doesn't come from big tobacco's playbook. We don't have to smoke to survive, but we do need to eat. The industry argues that ultra-processed foods serve a purpose. They're cheap, convenient, and calorie-dense. A lifeline for those with little time and limited resources. But for experts studying the impact that UPF is having on our health, that defense is hard to swallow.
This is a misplaced argument, in my opinion. The immediate cost might be lower, which attracts poor people to buy them. But this is not real food, this is empty calories, cheap ingredients. So the food industry is not fulfilling the food security. Food industry is creating a market for the food products which are not real foods.
If we want people who don't have a lot of resources to eat more healthfully, we need to give them the resources to do that. And that's a policy issue. And I think the whole question of ultra-processed foods is one that bears on inequality. And wealthy, educated people can afford to eat as healthfully as they like, and poor people cannot. That's not fair. We need to fix that. And the way to fix that is not by saying that ultra-processed foods are terrific. It's by making sure that healthier foods are more accessible, affordable, desirable, and available.
Thanks for watching. Now leave a comment and let us know what you made of this week's program. If you'd like to follow the show and stay updated, you can find links to our social media channels and our newsletter in the description below.